The summer sun was relentless in Grandview Estates, an affluent, meticulously planned community where the lawns were uniformly verdant, the mailboxes matched down to the last decorative scroll, and individuality was, shall we say, discouraged. It baked everything to a crisp, turning the asphalt shimmeringly hot and wilting even the most resilient petunias. For months, I'd watch the tiny hairline crack in my roof's Spanish tile grow, then spiderweb across several adjacent pieces, and finally, after a particularly aggressive hailstorm that sounded like 1,000 tiny hammers attacking my home, bloom into a gaping maw. This unsightly breach, located directly over my study, leaked with insidious precision onto my antique mahogany desk, a family heirloom that had survived generations and now faced the indignity of water stains. As a state building inspector for a quarter century, I knew a structural integrity issue when I saw one. My career wasn't just about inspecting towering skyscrapers or sprawling commercial complexes. It was about the fundamental safety and durability of every structure, from humble bungalows to historic landmarks. I'd walked countless construction sites, reviewed thousands of blueprints, and witnessed firsthand the disastrous consequences of ignored warnings. This roof, folks, was a 5-alarm fire waiting to happen, not just for my desk, but for the entire joist system beneath. My name is Arthur Pembroke, and for 25 years, my life has revolved around the precise language of building codes, the rigorous methodology of structural assessments, and the glorious, often unappreciated, art of ensuring that buildings don't, in fact, fall down. My work demands an almost obsessive eye for detail, an encyclopedic knowledge of municipal, state, and federal regulations, and the patience of a saint. The latter quality was particularly crucial when dealing with architects who thought aesthetics trumped safety, or contractors who preferred cutting corners to complying with standards. Little did I know, all those honed qualities, my expertise, my resolve, and my dwindling patience would be put to the ultimate test, not on a crumbling bridge or a collapsing skyscraper, but right here in my own meticulously manicured suburban backyard, a place I'd chosen for its supposed tranquility. Grandview Estates wasn't just a neighborhood, it was an institution. Or so the Grandview Homeowners Association, or GVEHOA, liked to believe. Its origins were shrouded in local legend, but its present was undeniably dominated by its board. This board, specifically its president, the formidable, perpetually tanned and fiercely coiffed Mrs. Priscilla Weatherby-Schmidt, operated with the precision of a Swiss watch and the iron fist of a medieval monarch. She was a woman who seemingly viewed every blade of grass, every exterior paint swatch, and every bird bath as a personal extension of her formidable will. Her pronouncements were gospel, her committee meetings were tribunals, and her mere presence could send jitters through even the most compliant residents. Their bylaws, bound in an imposing faux leather volume, were thicker than a phone book, a tome of minutiae covering everything from permissible shrub heights to the precise shade of off-white allowed for garage doors. Their fines were more punitive than a parking ticket blitz, designed not just to correct, but to inflict financial pain. And their enforcement squad, well, that's where my story truly begins, as two of its most dedicated agents were about to pay me a visit. I'd tried the official channels, of course. Arthur Pembroke, the by-the-book inspector, always believed in due process. 3 meticulously worded emails detailing the nature of the leak and its potential for structural damage were sent to the GVEHOA office. They were followed by 2 certified letters, complete with photographic evidence of the deteriorating tiles and the growing water stain on my beloved desk. Finally, a surprisingly cordial phone call to the GVEHOA administrative assistant, a perpetually overwhelmed young woman named Brenda, who assured me my request for roof repair approval was in the queue for the Architectural Review Committee. Each time, the response was a form letter, boilerplate legalese about the sacred Architectural Review Committees, the non-negotiable list of HOA-approved contractors, and the ever-present, almost mystical preservation of community aesthetic. It was a bureaucratic nightmare, a labyrinth of paperwork and waiting lists. My roof, meanwhile, continued its slow, damp descent into ruin, the ticking clock of potential rot echoing louder than the chirping cicadas. My patience, usually as vast as the California sky, was wearing thin. Finally, after a particularly soggy Tuesday morning that saw me placing a second bucket under a new drip, I'd had enough. The state codes I enforced were far more practical and less aesthetically obsessed than the GVEHOA's arbitrary decrees. I knew the code backwards and forwards. I knew the exact materials needed, and frankly, with a lifetime of hands-on experience, I had the skills. Plus, I had a free Saturday, a rarity in my demanding schedule. I called my nephew Mark, a strapping young man just out of community college with more enthusiasm than roofing experience, and asked him to meet me at the local hardware superstore. We left with a truckload of premium roofing sealant, several bundles of matching Spanish tiles, painstakingly sourced to meet the original design, ironically, and a renewed sense of purpose. "Uncle Arthur," Mark said, squinting at the intense midday sun as we unloaded the supplies from my old reliable pickup. "Are you sure we shouldn't just hire a crew? This looks like a big job, and I've mostly just installed shelves, not entire roofs." I patted his shoulder, feeling the familiar weight of my tool belt against my hip. "Mark, the GVEHOA has a crew. They're called Arthur and Mark. Besides," I added with a wink, gesturing at the cracked tiles, "it's good to keep one's skills sharp, and this leak won't wait for committee approval, nor will it respect their precious aesthetic when my ceiling caves in." We worked diligently, with the focused intensity that only a professional can bring to a task, even a personal one. The sun beat down, but the satisfaction of tackling a real problem outweighed the discomfort. Mark, surprisingly adept with a tile cutter after a quick tutorial, handled the careful removal of the damaged sections, chiseling away mortar with a precision that belied his inexperience. I, with years of hands-on experience that spanned everything from historical restoration to modern commercial builds, meticulously cleaned the substrate, removing old debris and ensuring a pristine base. I then applied the high-grade, self-adhesive waterproof membrane, pressing it down firmly, smoothing out every bubble, creating an impenetrable barrier. Finally, I set the new tiles, aligning them perfectly, ensuring a seamless, watertight seal that would outlast the house itself. It wasn't just a repair. It was an exemplary repair, one that would pass any inspection, including my own rigorous state standards. The first sign of trouble came around noon, just as we were finishing the last few tiles and I was admiring our work. A gleaming, oversized golf cart, the kind usually reserved for giving prospective buyers tours of the Grandview clubhouse and its immaculate amenities, rumbled aggressively up my driveway. Its electric motor, usually a hushed whisper, seemed to whine with indignation. Behind the wheel was Mrs. Priscilla Weatherby-Schmidt herself, her face a mask of barely contained fury, her perfectly sculpted coiffure seemingly defying gravity despite the oppressive humidity. Her eyes, usually narrowed in discerning judgment, were wide with outrage. Beside her sat Mr. Henderson, the HOA's resident busybody and bylaws expert, a man who seemed to derive perverse joy from quoting obscure clauses. He clutched a laminated clipboard like a shield or perhaps a weapon, ready to deploy the full force of Article 7, Section C, Subsection 4. Mr. Pembroke, Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt's voice cut through the afternoon air, sharper than any saw, more piercing than any broken tile. It was a voice accustomed to commanding attention and instilling fear. "What in the name of Grandview Estates do you think you are doing?" I calmly descended the ladder, careful not to track any dust onto the pristine driveway, wiping sweat from my brow with a gloved hand. I met her gaze, unflustered. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt. As you can see, I'm repairing my roof. It's been leaking for weeks, and my repeated requests for approval have, as you know, gone unanswered." Mr. Henderson, already flipping to a specific page on his clipboard, adjusted his frameless glasses, the lenses glinting malevolently in the sun. "Mr. Pembroke, Article 7, Section C, Subsection 4 of the GVEHOA Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions explicitly states that all exterior structural repairs, including roofing, must be performed by an HOA-approved, licensed, and insured contractor, following a submitted and approved architectural review application." He practically spat the words out, triumphant, as if he had just discovered a hidden clause in a centuries-old treaty. His finger jabbed at the laminated sheet. "And if I may remind you," Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt chimed in, her voice rising in pitch, adding a layer of aristocratic indignation, "failure to comply results in immediate fines and potentially legal action, including forcible cessation of work. This is an egregious violation of community standards, Mr. Pembroke. You're disrupting the aesthetic. Our pristine property values are at stake." She gestured vaguely at my house, as if my perfectly laid new tiles were somehow an affront to the very concept of suburban grandeur. I sighed, a long, weary exhalation that conveyed years of dealing with unreasonable people. "I understand the bylaws, Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt. I assure you I've read them. However, my roof was in a state of advanced disrepair that severely threatened the structural integrity of my home and the safety of its contents. My numerous attempts to gain your association's approval were met with bureaucratic silence and stalling. I acted to prevent further, more costly, and potentially hazardous damage." "Silence does not grant permission, Mr. Pembroke," she declared, her eyes narrowing to slits. "And your choice of, dare I say, amateur labor is frankly appalling. Look at this boy." She gestured dismissively at Mark, who stood frozen with a tile trowel in hand, looking like a deer in headlights. "This is a 5-star community, Mr. Pembroke, not a do-it-yourself slum for unsupervised adolescents." Just then, the distinct sound of approaching sirens, quickly muffled, then the crunch of tires on gravel, filled the air. 2 patrol cars, their lights flashing a silent, ominous red and blue, pulled onto my street and idled behind Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt's golf cart. My jaw dropped. Was this seriously happening? Had she called the police? 2 uniformed officers emerged, a young woman with a polite but firm demeanor, and a burly man with a thoughtful expression. They looked slightly bewildered to find themselves mediating a dispute over roof repairs in a gated community, but their faces were resolute. "Is there a problem here, folks?" the young officer asked, surveying the scene. The pristine suburban street, the angry HOA president, the younger man holding a trowel, and me, descending a ladder with a determined look. Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt puffed out her chest, recovering her imperious composure. "Officers, thank heavens you're here. This man, Mr. Arthur Pembroke, is in clear violation of our community bylaws. He is performing unauthorized and unapproved construction on his private property after repeated warnings from the Grandview Estates Homeowners Association." She emphasized private property with an ironic flourish, considering her earlier claims about community aesthetic. The officer looked at me, then at my perfectly repaired roof, then back at the gleaming golf cart. "Unauthorized construction, ma'am? What seems to be the issue, specifically?" "He's fixing his own roof," Mr. Henderson interjected, his voice high-pitched with outrage, as if it were the most heinous crime imaginable. "Without permission, and with unskilled labor." The officer blinked, processing the information. "He's fixing his own roof?" She exchanged a quick, incredulous look with her partner, clearly trying to grasp the severity of the alleged offense. "Indeed," Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt huffed, exasperated by what she perceived as police slowness to grasp the gravity of the situation. "And we wish to press charges for trespassing on community property and unauthorized construction. We are a gated community after all." "Trespassing on community property?" I scoffed, stepping forward, my voice still calm, but a flicker of irritation sparking in my eyes. "This is my private driveway, my private home, and I'm repairing my own property to prevent further damage and ensure its structural integrity." "It's a gated community, Mr. Pembroke," she retorted, oblivious to the logical inconsistencies in her argument. "Your actions reflect on all of us. This is an affront to our collective property values." The second officer, the burly man, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward with a more serious expression. "Sir, can I see some identification, please?" His tone was courteous but firm. I reached into the leather tool belt cinched around my waist, pulled out my worn wallet, and extracted my driver's license. Then, with a deliberate flourish, I pulled out my official State of California Building Inspector Identification Card. It was a standard-issue laminated card, nothing flashy, but the prominent state seal, my official photo, and the bold, clear words, "State Building Inspector Arthur Pembroke," were unmistakable and highly authoritative. I handed both to the officer. He took them, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly as he read the second card. He looked at me, then at the meticulously laid new tiles on my roof, then back at the card, a silent, knowing look dawning on his face. He then subtly showed it to his partner, who also raised an eyebrow, a small, wry smile playing on her lips. "Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt," the first officer said, her voice now much softer, almost hesitant, the previous formality replaced by a subtle shift in deference. "Are you aware that Mr. Pembroke is a state building inspector?" Priscilla Weatherby-Schmidt, for the first time in memory, looked genuinely flustered. Her perfectly tanned face paled slightly under her formidable coiffure, and her jaw went slack. She blinked once, twice, as if trying to reboot her formidable mental processor. A state? What now?" she stammered. the words barely audible. "A state building inspector," the burly officer repeated slowly and deliberately, his gaze now fixed on her with a hint of barely suppressed amusement. "Meaning, ma'am, he's literally an expert in, and enforcer of, building codes and structural integrity for the entire state of California. He's the person who certifies that buildings are safe and compliant with all regulations." Mr. Henderson, who had been puffing himself up, ready for another bylaw citation, dropped his clipboard. It clattered loudly on the pavement, the sound echoing in the sudden profound silence. His face, usually a mask of righteous indignation, was now a portrait of utter disbelief. "So," I said, my voice calm but now laced with a new, quiet authority, the kind that comes from years of experience and irrefutable knowledge, "you're telling me that you wish to press criminal charges against a certified state building inspector for ensuring the structural soundness of his own property, using professional-grade materials and techniques that meet or exceed all state and federal building codes, simply because he didn't fill out your form in time." I paused, letting the implication hang in the warm, still air. "Do you understand the kind of public relations nightmare that would be, ma'am?" Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt stammered, a vein throbbing faintly in her temple. But the bylaws, the aesthetics, the precedent." Her arguments, once so absolute, now sounded hollow, almost childlike. Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt, the first officer, interrupted gently, stepping forward. "While we genuinely appreciate your commitment to community standards and maintaining Grandview's reputation, I don't believe unauthorized repair by a state-certified expert who is also the property owner is a valid criminal offense. In fact, if anything, by proactively fixing a structural issue, Mr. Pembroke has probably improved the value and safety of the property, not detracted from it." The burly officer added, his voice gaining a slightly more pointed edge, "And speaking of safety, ma'am, if this roof was indeed leaking, as Mr. Pembroke claims, it could have led to serious issues like mold growth, extensive structural decay, and other hazardous conditions that would actually detract significantly from community value and potentially invite far more serious state intervention. He seems to have done a good deed here, preventing a potentially much larger problem." The silence that followed was deafening, thicker than the summer humidity. Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt looked like a deer caught in the blinding headlights of an oncoming truck, her carefully constructed facade of unshakable authority crumbling around her. Mr. Henderson was still staring at his fallen clipboard, as if it had somehow betrayed him by revealing a truth he couldn't comprehend. The power dynamic on the street had shifted irrevocably. "Well," I said, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips, a smile of quiet victory, "if there are no further criminal accusations, I believe Mark and I have a few more tiles to seal just to ensure absolute perfection. Unless, of course, you'd like to provide an official GVEHOA inspection of my work right now. I'd be more than happy to walk you through the process, point out all the code compliances, and perhaps even offer a free consultation on proper roof maintenance." My tone was outwardly polite, but the subtle challenge was unmistakable. The officers visibly suppressed grins, turning their heads slightly to hide their amusement. Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt, finally regaining some semblance of composure, though her cheeks were flushed a deep crimson that clashed spectacularly with her tan, muttered something utterly unintelligible about misunderstandings and community harmony and how we all just want what's best for Grandview. She then quickly reversed her oversized golf cart, nearly running over Mr. Henderson's foot as he scrambled to retrieve his disgraced clipboard and sped away, leaving a faint, acrid scent of burning rubber and dashed authority in her wake. It was the fastest I'd ever seen her retreat. The officers exchanged a look of shared amusement. "Looks like we're done here, Mr. Pembroke," the first one said, her polite smile now unrestrained. "Nice work on the roof, by the way. Looks solid." "Thanks, officer," I replied, picking up my tools and signaling to Mark that we were indeed finished. "Just doing my job. Or, my hobby." Mark, who had been listening to the entire exchange from his perch on the ladder, wide-eyed with a mixture of shock and admiration, whistled. "Uncle Arthur, that was epic. You just shut down the Queen of Grandview with a plastic card. That's legendary." I winked. "Sometimes, Mark, the best way to deal with bureaucracy, especially the overzealous kind, is to remind them who actually knows what they're talking about. Knowledge is power, even over ridiculous HOA bylaws." From that day on, I noticed a subtle yet undeniable shift in the GVEHOA's interactions with me. My mail started arriving not just on time, but often a day early. My architectural requests, though still numerous, I had a few other long-delayed projects, were answered with surprising alacrity, often with a pre-approved stamp and a hastily scribbled note from Brenda. And every now and then, I'd see Mrs. Weatherby-Schmidt from afar, at the community pool or driving by my house on her golf cart, her eyes darting furtively towards my perfectly repaired roof. A flicker of grudging respect, or perhaps a healthy dose of fear in her gaze. She never quite met my eyes directly. I never pressed charges, of course. My goal wasn't retribution or to start a war with the HOA, but simple peace, a watertight roof, and the preservation of my desk. And as a state building inspector, I knew the most satisfying victory wasn't in paperwork or punitive fines, but in a job well done, a crisis averted, and perhaps a little bit of unexpected irony that taught a powerful lesson about true authority versus petty power. My roof was fixed, my desk was safe, and Grandview Estates was, for a little while at least, reminded of what real expertise looked like.